Many young adults coming out of the foster care system have not had competent parents to teach them and never had the opportunity to learn independent living skills. They will need the skills to survive in the world. We can't assume that they know these things because they don't. It's not like they wouldn't do the skills, they don't know how to do these skills. The traditional kids that have had parents teach them to do throughout their life. The program that I've developed as a teaching tool for these youth to use is a hands-on approach to learn skills so they have a better chance of being successful when they get out on their own. We don't only need to tell these kids what they're going to need, we need to show them how to implement what they're going to need. We need to tell them that they will need a bank account because they're going to have to pay their first and last month's rent when they finally find themselves an apartment that they can afford. They will have to have money for deposits, for electricity or gas, to be turned on for heat and hot water and cooking once they're renting. We need to tell them that when they get an apartment, they will be the most popular kid on the planet. We have to teach them to pick your friends carefully and not to go and pick the most popular kids. That is probably not going to be the best ones for them to be with. We need to tell them that if you work as hard as everyone else, you'll still be behind. Not because they'll want to be, it will be because they just are. We need to help instill a work ethic in them and tell them to work a little harder at it and don't be lazy. They're going to have to know about credit now. How credit can hurt them and how credit can help them. Because in the future, everything's going to be credit-based. They will need to know how important it is to pay their bills on time and what can happen to their credit if they don't. They just need to learn the whole concept of what credit means. They need to know how to do laundry. They've had no one teach them to put dark clothes in one pile and light clothes in another. Many of these kids don't have a parent that they can turn to for help. They have been transitioned from home to home throughout their lives, so they have not had the opportunity to learn basic skills that kids do who have supportive parents and stability in their homes and lives. The Midwest Evaluation of the Adult Functioning of Former Foster Youth, or the Midwest Study, is a comprehensive picture of how foster youth are faring after aging out of the foster care. This Midwest survey was done in 2010 around Chicago. There were 732 participants in the study, and they were interviewed 4 years after aging out of the foster care system. There were many questions in the Midwest study that the participants were asked, and comparisons were made between the sample of former foster youth and the nationally representative sample of young people in general population. The comparisons indicated that young people who have aged out of the foster care system fare poorly as a group compared to their peers across a variety of domains. Results of this study showed that the average yearly income of these now adults at 23 and 24 years of age was $8,000 a year. That's not even enough to pay the rent. Many were homeless and looking for a safe place to sleep. Many spoke about how they were hiding in mall bathrooms and standing on the toilets, hiding their feet so they would not be seen by security, so they'd have a place to sleep at night. Many of these youth are homeless, hungry, cold, dirty, and scared. Some have been recruited into drug delivery trafficking. These former youths were told if they just delivered this package to another location that they would get some money, which was much needed. Before long, the same recruiters were offering them drug use free. It wasn't used to party. They were self-medicating, so their situation wouldn't hurt so badly. Many young women feel the need to sell themselves for sex or get into sex trafficking so someone would be able to take care of them and they would have a place to sleep at night. I visited with Jim Webb. He's a resident agent in charge of Homeland Security investigations with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, Department of Homeland Security. And he told me that many pimps see foster care youth that are vulnerable as a provider for services. I just talked to him probably about a month ago. He said they're easy prey. He also pointed out that 50% of foster care youth that age out of the system when they turn 19 will be homeless. On the ICE web page, much information is given on human trafficking. It's very interesting to look at. Several of the common trafficking indicators are the victim does not have an ID, the victim is in the forced labor situation or sex trade, the victim is denied freedom of movement, or they'll be harmed, told they'll be harmed, or denied food, water, or sleep, or medical care. They're denied contact with their family and friends, and the victim is not allowed to socialize or attend any religious services. Each year, innocent men and women are exploited in human trafficking schemes by means of force, fraud, or coercion. Many vulnerable foster youth are victims of this because they are homeless and have no job. Rhonda Scortino and Sandy Morgan addressed human trafficking from foster care in their article in Foster Focus magazine. Rhonda was a former foster child herself who overcame abandonment and abuse, poverty and filth and hunger, and built a life of affluence, order, and fulfillment. She points out that it appears to be human nature to ignore a problem that doesn't directly affect us. She says that the problem of human trafficking are so large and overwhelming, many times we just ignore it and think it is somebody else's problem. Sandy Morgan is the director of Vanguard University's Global Center for Women and Justice. She pointed out that factors contributing to commercial sexual exploitation are generalized poverty, homelessness, which contributes to a culture of transient street youth. A dysfunctional family life often exposes children to emotional and physical trauma while substantially contributing to low self-esteem. Much of the home life consistent of drugs or alcohol abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, divorce, and lack of parental oversight. Many at-risk youth live in a detached communities, meaning there's an unwillingness or an inability to fill the role of the family. And as a result of this, these youth are increasingly vulnerable to the false promises of predators that lure them into the life of commercial sex exploitation. In an interview with Chris Chmielewski, he's the editor of Focus magazine, he pointed out that both boys and girls can be victims of human trafficking. It is the second largest business in the United States, which is a $6.6 billion a year business. The average foster youth moves 4 times a year. They get disconnected, and it's hard for them to attach to anybody because they won't let anybody get close. If these youth have somebody that believes in them, they would be open to learning skills while still in foster care that they just so desperately need. They could turn out to be responsible, productive members of society. You might ask how you get the kid to get close. The answer is you teach them and encourage them. They really do want to learn. Each person has a purpose for their life. With proper support, training, and encouragement, they might have the opportunity to find out what it is. After doing research, I believe help is available for these youth by teaching them independent living skills while they're still in the foster home. I visited several foster youth, 16 years old and older, and they have identified areas that they feel would be beneficial for them. They were willing to participate in a program to help them acquire the skills while still in foster care. After visiting with them, I realized that they were in need of several skills that they weren't even aware of. I needed to have a way to find out what areas were strengths and weaknesses in their abilities. For this, I went to the Ansel Casey Foundation. The Casey Family Program partners with others across America to support the safety and success of children. They have an assessment tool available to help youth in foster care and make successful transitions to adulthood. This is called the Casey Life Skills Assessment. This assessment asks youth questions in the area of daily living, self-care, relationships, communication, housing, money management, work, and study life. It just covers a whole gamut of stuff that they will need to know. I asked them, kids, do you feel you're ready for the next phase of your life? The answer on every assessment I did was no. By having the youth I worked with use this assessment tool, it gave me a starting point to know what area each youth needed to develop before being prepared to move forward into independent living. After I assessed each individual youth, I needed to find a resource to help prepare these youth for making it on their own in the world. I went to the internet and found a great resource book. It's digital, so it's easy accessible to the youth that I worked with. The book was called The New Making It on Your Own by Ansel. Depending on what areas needed the most work, I determined where I would have them start in the workbook. This book gave them the hands-on approach, how to learn the needed skills that they would need. The youth were able to complete many of the exercises using the telephone book, newspaper, or other readily available resource materials that they could find any day. They also had to contact other people for information. Getting ready to move out on your own is hard work, but it also can be fun. To make it on their own, the youth will need a source of income. In the chapter on job hunting, the youth had to assess what kind of work that they've done in the past and what they'd like to do in the future. They worked on, they had to look in newspapers, advertisements for job postings. We went to job services office. They had to fill out applications. They had to call or visit the office to find out how the office can help them find a job or find out how they could register at the job service office. Other resources available to them were school counselors, friends or relatives, or cold contacts for job wanted signs. They learned what documents they would need in order to get a job. Some of these included the Social Security card, birth certificate, photo ID. They had to explore how to get each of these documents in their possession. They practiced how to fill out job applications by getting a fact sheet ready with their information on it. We did mock interviews so they'd know how a potential employee would be asking them questions in the interview. They had to write a letter when they were done with the interview, thanking the employee for the interview. Another area we worked on was having your own place. And that is one of the most exciting things about being on your own. When studying about apartment living, the youth had to figure out where they would like to live and what they're looking for in housing. Again, they had to go to the newspaper and look for housing advertisements. They had to assess how much they could afford to pay for housing. Housing advertisements use a lot of abbreviations, so they had to learn how to translate what the abbreviations mean so they would know what they're looking at. They had to contact utilities companies such as the telephone, electric, gas companies and find out about the cost of the utilities that they'd have to be paying. They had to find out where they would call to get their heat turned on or their phones turned on. This included also part of that was the security deposit. When they found out they would have to pay the first month's rent and connection charges for stuff, the different deposits. After they got this figured out, then they had to explore options of how they were going to furnish their first place. They had to assess a need and a want list for furniture and where they could acquire this stuff pretty inexpensively. Then they needed to figure out how they'd set up housekeeping items to bring or to help them keep their place clean and how to store, prepare, and serve food. They had to price these items so they'd know what it cost to set up their house. Then they got to list items they might want in their home, but not necessities such as TVs and video games and etc. In this chapter, we also went over how to read and understand a lease. That is one area where most people don't even really think about, but a lease is very important. You need to read the small print of what it says. We also talked about the advantages and disadvantages of sharing an apartment with someone else. You need to have ground rules to be in a situation of sharing an apartment. And you have to know what to do if your roommate would up and move out on you. And you were left to carry the responsibility of the apartment and all the living expenses. They'd have to know how are they going to accomplish that. Being able to have home management skills is important for youth going into independent living also. This was a difficult task at first. With proper training, though, it is manageable. Knowing how to plan, budget, and prepare good meals is important, and the youth had to plan a menu for a week after studying the different basic food groups and what they would need to eat to stay healthy. They had to plan their menu to stay within their budget, and after meal planning, they had to make a grocery list of the items they would need. And while at the grocery store, they were taught how to do price comparisons and buy what they could use on sale. They learned several tips about grocery shopping, such as never go shopping when they're hungry, or stick to their grocery list, check the expiration dates on items like milk, and always take a calculator so they know how much they're spending. That's pretty important. The youth had to prepare a meal also. They had to cook something that they could follow a recipe. We found a 4-recipe cookbook that had hundreds of recipes that only took 4 ingredients to prepare a dish. We found this cookbook. It was called the 4-Ingredient Cookbook by Coffee and Kale, and it was put together for basic cooking. They used this to prepare, read the recipe, and prepare the meal. The youth had to make a plan for keeping their place clean. After having rooms that was messy all their life, this was quite a challenge. They had to figure out the tools and equipment that they'd need to do this job, and part of the housekeeping is also doing the laundry. They had to learn how to organize the laundry by sorting clothes properly. They had to use the right laundry products and select the best washer or dryer settings to keep their clothes looking nice. Being independent means learning how to get the most for your money. These youths have to be taught how to shop smart. They had to analyze what type of consumer they are, and the youth had to go to 3 different stores and do comparison pricing on the same item. They learned a lot by doing this. They also learned about using coupons and where to find coupons and to read the small print on that also. Many of them had to use learn about warranties and how many times warranties are not needed. We talked about switch and bait and how it's illegal for stores to use this method to convince you to buy another product or service at a higher price. One area we extensively worked on was credit and how important it is in their life. We discussed how credit cards work, the advantages and disadvantages. We discussed how important it is to pay your credit card bill right away and to pay more than what your minimum payment is and why, and to use credit card sparingly. I also took them to a rent-to-own place, and it seemed really attractive at first to them. They thought, wow, I can get this chair or this couch or this stereo for just a few dollars a week. Well, they found out after doing the math, they realized that they were going to be paying much more for an item in the long run. They were reminded that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Most youths want their own vehicle, and they will need a source of reliable transportation. I had the youth explore all the methods of transportation that's available to them wherever they plan to live. Most foster kids do not have the opportunity to get a driver's license, so we went to the county courthouse and got a copy of a driver's license manual in order for them to study to get a driver's license. While they're at the courthouse, I was able to find out where they were able to find out where to get their driver's license and find out the steps they would have to take to get a driver's license. And we also went to the office so they could know where to get car taxes and license paid. They also learned how often a car license needs renewed. None of the youth that I worked with had their own vehicles, so we also talked about how to buy their own car. We had them realistically analyze what it would cost to buy, operate, or maintain their own vehicle. We went to different dealerships and they looked at different cars, and I had them explore the different options for how they would pay for this car. Again, this was a good time to remind them how important their credit is because the bank will receive information about their credit history. They filled out sample credit applications so they'd know what information they would need in order to receive the credit. Another area discussed was car insurance and the different options available to them. We visited with an agent, and they gave different options to the youth about insurance and reminded them they have to have insurance on the car in order to license the car. We priced different things that would require them be required when owning a vehicle, like gas and needed oil changes, new tires. They had a pretty good picture of understanding of the responsibilities and costs of maintaining a vehicle. We also talked about public transportation, and it was looking pretty good at a good option at this point. I had them look up the different prices and resources available for them for transportation, whether it was taxis or cab or city transportation or whatever means that wherever they were going to live, that would be there for them to have ways to get around and get to jobs. Many of the youth, we found they didn't have a clue where to find medical help when they needed it. The youth had to make a list of names and phone numbers of the resources available to them for medical care. They were shown how to go to the yellow pages and look up different doctors or dentists, and they were able to get a copy of their immunization records from the schools that they attended. We discussed different scenarios with situations concerning health and what needed to be done in these scenarios. We discussed how important it is for them to be responsible for their own health and where they would go for help if they needed help for alcohol or drugs. The demands of life can be very stressful, so they identified areas that stress them and causes depression, and how to identify the symptoms and how to handle that. I had them identify who they'd call for help and write it down. We watched different videos and had extensive communication on preventing STDs and AIDS and safe sex. We talked about pregnancy prevention and what to do in the case of a pregnancy and the importance of prenatal care. Everyone needs to have leisure time and have some fun. The youth identified activities they like to do and the cost of these activities. We discussed how it's important for them to take time for themselves and to enjoy activities outside of work or school. It was important for them to know that they will be the most popular kid when they get their own apartment, and to know others will try to use them and their apartment for possible illegal activities that they will be responsible for. They need to meet new people and make new friends that won't use them, and to look for activities in the community that are low cost or free to attend. We looked in the local papers to find events to attend. One of the hardest areas identified was money management. It was a reality check when they had to keep an expense diary every day and what they were spending. They saw a sample paycheck and went over the amount of money that is actually earned for the hours that they worked, and then the amount they have left to spend after Social Security, Medicare, federal and state income tax comes out of their check. I had them set up a budget and list everything we'd talked about so far that they would have to pay out. This included their rent, food, utilities, transportation, recreation, anything we'd already discussed. When done figuring out what they need on their budget, we talked about checking and savings account. They called banks, they got ideas of what they were looking at and all the different resources that was available to them in these areas. I had them practice writing checks and make sure they were following proper procedures to protect themselves against potential fraud. They practiced keeping track of a check register so they know exactly how much money they had in their account. They need to know how to balance a checkbook. They learned how to make deposits and endorse checks, and they learned how to use ATMs. The reason I wanted to do this project was, the reason I did it was because by teaching our youth the independent living skills they will need to be able to survive as they're aged out of the system, we can help them alter their present situation and help them with the reality of success for their future. Many of the people that I spoke to during this project were former foster youth and are now very successful, fulfilled adults. Every one of them will tell you that someone believed in them and helped them. They had someone that came along beside them and helped them. If we all stop and think about that one that helped us, we can see the reality of this statement. Who was your one? I want to be the one that helps these youth transition into young adulthood with the skills that they need to succeed to become a productive member of society. What do I plan to do with what I learned through this project? While being the supervisor in the organization I work for, I am taking this plan to the board of directors and the CEO of our company and implementing this program into all youth schools that are 16 or older and heading into the world of independent living. The foster care specialists will work one-on-one with these youth, helping them along the way with the help of the foster parents to help set these youth up for success and give them a hope for their future by teaching the independent living skills they will need to be successful.